Greetings everyone and welcome to another Defcamp Melderon TV video. If you have watched the channel previously, you know that I did a BWL thoughts and predictions video that kind of went over what I thought were going to be pain points or strategy points that were going to be points of contention in BWL, things that are going to be more difficult compared to MC, and that type of thing. This video is very similar in that I want to go over AQ40 itself as a raid, some of my thoughts and what I've been seeing and experiencing, and I'll talk about that in a second, and also what I think is going to be very different compared to what we're used to in raids like BWL and MC. So to get started, I'd like to talk about what I've been doing as a guild to prepare ourselves for this. And I'm sure we're in the small minority of guilds that are doing this, but I can tell you with experience some of the things you're going to be looking forward to in stepping into this raid. So we have set up a PTR that is based upon a popular private server's values. We did edit those values to bring it more into close to what we think Classic will run into. Our main tank, Navik, who you probably may or may not know is part of the CWL team and did the leveling guide for us. He's a brilliant mind when it comes to Warcraft. And what we did was we looked at old videos and actually took damage values from old videos, the frequency of certain cooldowns, and actually recoded a PTR to make it as close to Classic as possible, and then delved into it. And what I can say, just as TLDR, is that AQ40 is going to be much more difficult than BWL. I'm not saying it's going to be the hardest raid ever made. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not one of those people that are going to say Classic's harder than Retail, Retail's harder than Classic. Classic is Classic, and within the bounds of that reality, we have a certain amount of things we can experience as player base, right? And I think AQ40 as a raid is a significant step up from BWL. That's something I can say with confidence. And I'm going to go over some of the things I've experienced, so my thoughts first, and then I'll go into predictions. So the first thing I want to cover is gear prioritization. If you haven't spent time as a guild going over every piece of gear and how they're going to be allocated to your raid, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Now, if you're a DKP raid, this really doesn't affect you. However, a good DKP officer or a good officer in a guild will know where the pieces should go. And it's okay to have some kind of a loot council-y decision making while still having a DKP system. I think you should really delve into what those thoughts are and be like, okay, does this piece of gear should it be better in a warrior's hands versus a rogue's, X, Y, and Z, all those things, class specific, and then you have the tier sets as well. So you have to know who these tier sets to go to over other classes. So we spent, I'd say, 3 hours just for AQ40 going over each piece of gear and where they should likely be allocated. Now, we are a loot council raid, so we are not DKP, so this is going to be very different if you're DKP, but we went in there and looked and said, who are these pieces going to be going to? Not so much like, who's the best warrior would go to. No, basically class-wise first. And depending on what gear they have, prioritizations are different depending on whether you're an orc on the horde side versus a tauren, right? Because of the axe specialization or because if someone doesn't have edge masters. So those are things you have to take into consideration when you're distributing loot. And overall, what I can say is that you should definitely just spend time and look over all the pieces that can drop and where they should go, and how that's going to have the best benefit to your raid. And then you can start thinking about, like, who's the better person they should go to, or, DKP, do we want to limit DKP in certain circumstances? Because pieces of gear being allocated to the right people may have significant impacts on your ability to get bosses down, right? This is one of those raids, kind of like Nax, where you're progressing through and pieces will help you, especially nature resist gear that drops off at the bug trio, let's say, if you kill it in a certain way, will help you in Huhuran, things like that. So your melee soakers may need to have pieces allocated to them first, stuff like that. And the next thing I want to talk about are the tier sets. Now, the tier sets are interesting in that they are shared loot, kind of like if you're used to, let's say TBC, where there's pieces that drop that can go to certain classes to turn in for gear. And that's very similar. You're going to turn in that piece with other things like the idols and stuff like that to turn in and get pieces of gear. Now, that's the priority of this gear is not equal, meaning that, let's say, distributing for Shaman, so this is a clear one for the Horde, the tier 2.5 set is extremely good to get to a Shaman very quickly. At least one Shaman, maybe even two in your raid that are healers because of the 5-piece set bonus that reduces the chain heal cast time by 0.4 seconds. Now that is going to increase your healing throughput, and let me tell you something, healing is much more intensive in AQ than it is in BWL because of the trash packs mostly, and we'll get into that. But knowing that you should get that 5-piece set bonus to a Shaman quicker than other classes may have significant impacts on your healing throughput. Another class is Warrior. For tanks, for main tanks, those set pieces are actually very good. Some that are good for DPS, there are good pieces for casters, but each piece of gear, shoulders, hands, legs, are shared with different classes. It's not like TBC where every token is shared among the same 3 or 4 classes. No, this is very unique in that a headpiece maybe different from the shoulder piece, depending on the different classes that can actually turn them in. So going through all those things and deciding which is the best allocation for your raid is very, very paramount. I can't stress that enough. I would definitely go through all of these things and look through them. I'm sure there's guides online to go through that. I don't want to go through the minutia of those things in this video. I have a giant spreadsheet that we created in order to kind of what we're going through, and that's kind of our raid's way of doing things, right? Your raid may be a little bit different, and I think if I just put up a spreadsheet, I would get a bunch of people asking me questions and disagreeing with me, and that's totally fine. All I'm saying is do that for yourself in any way you feel is the best way. So the next thing I'm talking about are the mount priority. Now, AQ is a very big raid. There are vast tracts of tunnels and subterranean parts that are just a painstaking to get through on foot. And eventually your entire raid will get mounts, but it may take a month clearing, maybe even more, to get all of your players with one of these mounts. And of course, certain have different colors, and I think people are going to be fighting over that as well, but the red mounts are the most rare ones, by the way. So we kind of made a list of what we think how we're going to allocate those mounts. And your first one should go to your tank, right? Your main tank. That's pretty obvious. Setting up pulls, getting to a right position is very, very important, because a lot of these trash packs have very specific ground effect or area of effect or range of their abilities that is very important to get that positioning down very quickly, okay? Main tank to me is number one. The next two, in my opinion, should go to rogues, and here's why. During the Battleguard Sartura encounter, you're going to have to get those adds down very quickly, and getting rogues into position with the tank to CC them, either kidney shot or cheap shot those things, because they are CCable or stunnable, I should say. Getting them in position is very, very important. So I think your second and third mount should go to rogues specifically for that purpose. Tell me in the comments if you agree with that, if you've done AQ40. But the thing is, I'm willing to bet most of you either don't remember or have not done AQ40 in a very long time and have not practiced on a PTR. Now, you private server veterans out there may have better insight than I do, so please put in the comments below if you understand that at a higher level. The next one should go to your puller, which is usually a hunter, obviously, so that should go to your hunter to set up pulls. That's your fourth one. And then as you go down the line, I would also give one to a tank healer. Tank healers are very, very important. They have to be with the tank when they set up these pulls. Actually, I'd probably give your second mount to a tank healer over the two rogues before Sartura. You should get 4 drops before Sartura, hopefully. If you don't, you may have to think about that a little bit better. Going back, I'd say tank healer, rogues, your hunter puller, and then I'd actually alternate between tank healers and off tanks until all of your tank healers and off tanks, potential tanks, have mounts. And then you can go into your healers, your backup hunters, and then you should start giving it to your melee DPS and then your casters. So casters, unfortunately, you're going to be last in this priority, at least in my opinion, because you have your ranged caster, number one. Your ranges, you can close that gap much quicker. And secondly, I would say that other classes like mages have blink abilities to close that gap. Thinking about that tunnel of death where you have to mow through there and move pretty quickly, you can see how having your tank healers and your tanks having that mobility will be much better going in. So that's what I wanted to cover with mount priority. Something to definitely keep in mind, something to keep thinking about as you go on through. Just keep in mind that there is a priority. You shouldn't be willy-nilly just throwing these things out to different people, and that if you do that, you may gimp yourself. Next thing I want to talk about are the trash packs. Now, all the trash is pretty hard compared to other trash packs in other raids, but there are a couple groups that are really, really difficult, and these may really hamper you guys down and really reduce your world buff allocation within your raid. How many people have world buffs as you get through? These things can easily kill your DPS, even your tanks, and knowing some strategies to kind of counteract that will make or break your run, I think. These are the things I think will have the most deleterious effects to your world buff availability as you move through AQ40 will be the trash packs. So the first ones you're going to hit, and I have a very nice guide that was written on Classic Wowhead. I'm going to link that in the description. I would definitely read through this. But the first group there's actually a couple groups of the Anubisath Sentinels, and these guys have one random ability that could be like a resist or a heal or a thunderclap, Mortal Strike, Mana Burn. All these things are pretty difficult. They only have one ability, and when you down one, they actually heal the other ones, and these are groups of 4, and there's 2 of these big packs before you hit Skeram. I would read through the guide and make sure you understand what you have to do if one of these has an ability. If you do wipe, or if one does reset, they actually re-roll that ability, okay? It isn't like you're set to know what that ability is going to be. You're going to have to use Detect Magic and stuff like that if you're mages to determine what they have, if it's detectable. And then the next really tough group are going to be right before you go to Twin Imps. So this is either after you kill Huhuran or after you kill Viscidus. And these guys are really tough. And you got to make sure you pull them one at a time, because if you don't, you will wipe. Speedrun guilds are going to be, I don't know what strategies they're going to be using, but for us, we have to be very careful of making sure you're at very long distances away from these bosses, or these trash packs. They should be bosses, really, because you'll notice that the pull range on these things are huge. Okay, that's another thing I want to talk about, is that you got to really stay back, let your tank or your puller or whoever go forward, have the hunter pull these things and get back as fast as they possibly can, because they have abilities that can hit them even from long distances. And these packs are the Anubisath Defenders. And these guys can have 2 random abilities, and the combination of those 2 things could be very easy, medium, or extremely hard. Again, just like with the Sentinels, they can reset, or if you wipe, and they will re-roll their abilities. There's no way you can really strategize what they're going to be before you get them, but you have to be able to get in a place where you get in there, you see what they have, and then your raid as a unit has to move to the right locations. A good example of a really bad one would be like Thunderclap and Meteor. So Thunderclap does an area of effect around the defender that hits your tanks and your melee really hard, right? And Meteor, your raid has to be grouped up, because if you guys aren't, a meteor can one-shot anyone, right? So you have to be grouped up to like combine that splash damage. So the more people that are grouped up where the meteor impact is will reduce the damage, and then you're going to have 2 groups, a melee group and a caster group, so your casters and your healers don't get hit by the thunderclaps. You're going to have these 2 groups that are kind of sitting, one in melee range and one farther away, and it's just chaos, right? Another thing is the disease they put up. So say you get meteor, and then there's this disease they put up in the middle of the raid, and if the person with the disease doesn't get out of the raid, they will kill people around them. So if you can imagine a scenario where everyone's grouped up because of the meteor, someone gets the disease, that person runs out, they get the meteor, now they're dead. And that can happen. There's a lot of randomness, and that's something I'm going to get in my prediction section, where I think that's going to be a huge pain point for a lot of guilds, is the randomness of this place. And then I think world buffs as a whole aren't going to be as reliable as they were in BWL and MC. The next big pack you'll have to worry about is after you kill the Twin Emperors, you're going to have 2 different packs you're going to have to watch out for. And the first one is the Qiraji Champion pack. And these guys have a bunch of different adds that can be in them: Champions, Slayers, and Mind Slayers. So basically, the number of these can vary, but they have a lot of unique and really pain in the ass abilities. They have a mana burn. The Mind Slayers have mana burn, Insanity, which is a mind control, and then that player has to be CC'd. If it's a warrior with world buffs, you can imagine they can one-shot a Clothy pretty easily. The Slayers have a whirlwind that are just like the Sartura adds that will just cleave through people if they're not placed in the right location. And then you have the Champions, which have a cleave. They have Intimidating Shout, which is a fear. It's rough. These guys are touted as the worst trash packs in the game by many people, even including trash packs that are in Nexramas. Our strategy was, again, we're Horde Alliance. You're going to have to think about this a little bit differently, using Fear Ward and stuff like that, but instead we actually forego using Wind Fury Totem here. We use Grounding Totem, at least for the 90% of the pull, and Tremor to nullify the fears and the mind controls, and this made these things a lot easier. Before we were using Wind Fury, we're like, we'll just cleave them down, blah, blah, blah. No. It was really, really tough. So we had the Shamans use Tremor and Grounding Totem to get through these packs. They're going to be very difficult. I think this is going to be one of the most difficult pulls in the game. So again, read through the strategy guide. I'm going to link in the description below. Really think about it, where you're going to be placing your characters and where you're going to be pulling these guys. Now the next one, which is also kind of tough, is you get these Anubisath Warders and Obsidian Nullifiers. Now Nullifiers are pretty easy to kill. They'll go down like paper. They can't get the full mana, because if they do, they'll do this like explosion, and that explosion will actually remove your world buffs. So they can't get the full mana. Luckily, what we did was we actually stacked them and cleaved them down very, very quickly. We didn't even have to mana burn them. I think that's going to be a good strategy for these guys, the Nullifiers. Now, the Anubisath Warders, we actually tanked away because they have a Fire Nova, does a lot of damage, and they have an AoE Entangling Roots, which, if not dispelled, will eat your players away. You can range this, and this is why we pull the Nullifiers away from them, kill them, and then we focus on the Anubisath Warders, and then they can be LOS'd as well. Try to find locations in the raid to LOS them, and that'll be a key to victory for you. Now that's pretty much all I'm going to cover as far as the trash is concerned. It's going to be tough, but as far as bosses are concerned, guys, I have to say, to be perfectly frank, there's only a few that really bother me. Viscidus, as long as you understand the strategy, pretty easy. Fangchris, as long as you understand the strategy, pretty easy. Bug Trio, as long as you kill them in the right order, not bad. Skeram is going to be tough if your raid is not kicking properly and your mages are not CCing the mind-controlled players easily. I think that that's the most important things, is to have positioning in 3 different positions, so when he goes into his mirror image, you can kick the arcane explosions, because they do a shit ton of damage. I would pop a greater arcane protection potion before this pull, and then also make sure your mages are confident in knowing that they can CC these adds, because you will be world buffed most likely going into Skeram. Now imagine what it's like if you're a mage having a warrior come up to you fully world buffed with that damage buff. You're going to die. You got to get these guys CC'd immediately, especially if it's a tank. Now, the Earthshock ability that Skeram does and his illusions will also do can be cheesed if you can make sure there's a rogue. Usually rogue is pretty easy in stealth, standing on the positions that they're going to be splitting into. As long as there's someone melee range and someone that's tanking them, quote unquote, they will not use this Earthshock. The Earthshock is very powerful, does a lot of damage, and it will interrupt spellcasting. If it's on a healer and the healer needs to heal in that moment, very, very difficult, right? Skeram is going to be a pain in the ass, I think. I think it's going to take some practice, and I think you just can't get frustrated, right? I think people are going to be wiping a lot in this raid. Am I saying that it's not going to get down? No. Am I saying that it's the hardest raid ever made? Absolutely not. I'm just saying that the complacency that you're probably in from BWL is probably very high. Our raid clears it in like 50 minutes. We mow through that place. It's a joke. And it wasn't a joke when we first got in there, but we still cleared it week 1. We didn't really have a lot of problems. We just got better at the trash packs. We got better at the depression room. We got better at things like, speeding up the bosses. And I think that AQ farm status is a lot farther away on a lot of these things. The next boss I want to talk about is Sartura. Now, Sartura can be difficult, and I think that it's all about making sure your raids spread out, getting those rogues to CC them with cheap shot, kidney shot, any type of interrupt you can do is very, very important. And stunning them, anything you can do to stun them, using sapper charges here, those guys got to go down. If they go down, Sartura is not that bad, and I think you guys can get through it pretty easily, but there's going to be some pain points and contention points. Okay guys, let's talk about Princess Huhuran. Before her Enrage, before her 30% where she goes absolutely apeshit, she's really, really easy. Basically, you just DPS her down, take care of the damage that goes out, and that's it. Now, this is really the only boss that I think your strategy is contingent upon world buffs being there. If you are fully world buffed, it's very possible to be able to just burn through her Enrage, where she's spewing all the poison damage, and you can just kill her that way. Unfortunately, if you are losing world buffs, especially if your tank's losing world buffs, if significant parts of your melee groups losing world buffs, this is where I actually would recommend, instead of just stacking damage, you actually stack NR gear. To have your 15 melee soakers actually wear NR gear, to where if you had world buffs, you just pop your consumes, you pop your nature resistance potion before the pull, pop it again during the 30% enrage or the berserk, and then just burn her down. If you don't have world buffs, guys, this fight is a lot different, and you will be using NR gear to soak, meaning that you really have to watch your threat if your tank is wearing NR gear. If your tank is not wearing NR gear and you have 15 additional people to stand in there, you shouldn't have a threat issue. But if you don't have enough melee and your tank is wearing NR gear, his or her threat production is going to be trash, and then you're going to have to really watch your damage. This is the issue with this fight. It's going to be difficult depending on what you have. If you have full world buffs, I really think it's going to be probably very easy. In the PTR, she uses a lot of her cooldowns right away, where I don't think it's going to be that brutal on Classic. I think her damage output's not going to be as crazy as we think. We really don't know yet. But the weird part about this fight is that your strategy totally revolves around whether you have world buffs or not. So this fight's going to be very interesting and could be a pain point, like I said, if you have world buffs or not. Twin Imps, I'm going to talk about them, but I don't think they're anywhere near as hard as people remember them, because of the increase in melee damage, because of how badass warriors are in this version of the game. If you get the mechanics down, if you know how to stand in the right position, your warrior tanks specifically stand in the right position when they switch sides, and they can get threat immediately, it's a cakewalk. It really is, guys. If your warlocks know what they're doing and know how to spam Searing Pain and know how to get aggro, honestly, the only trick is swapping back and forth. If you're like me, like a raid healer like me, I have to swap with the melee when Vecnalash and Veclor switch sides. Once you do it 1 or 2 times, honestly, it's not going to be a problem. It's going to be a little difficult if you haven't practiced it, but after that, it's going to be pretty easy. Ouro to me is going to be a pain in the ass. This is an optional boss before Cthulhu. You don't have to do it before Cthulhu. The optional bosses, again, you don't have to go to them until you're done the raid. But I think Ouro's going to be a pain. After he submerges these bug packs, these like ground pebbles go in random directions, and your players have to outrun them. If your melee doesn't get out soon enough, so if you don't have a good DBM or bigwigs and they aren't already running, those pebbles will really hurt them. And it's very possible that because all 3 pebbles are kind of stacked on top of each other, so that's 3 times the damage. And if your melee are all clumped, you can easily lose your melee core. Second thing is when he enrages at 30%, he still does this pebble ability. So your melee have to be moving around constantly and trying to hit him as much as you can. And this section is going to be mostly carried by your mages and warlocks and your hunters, because melee has to make sure they're not getting hit by these ground effects. The bugs are a pain in the butt as well. Ouro hits like a truck, and he's not tauntable. So having your tanks fight for top positions here, it's kind of like Broodlord. Broodlord isn't tauntable either, and I'm sure some of you have seen what happens when a melee pulls off of a tank. That's going to be what happens with Ouro as well. So it's almost like Broodlord, but with movement as well, with a lot of movement. So I think Ouro is going to be kind of tough, and I think that that's going to be one of the pain points for AQ40. And then lastly is Cthulhu. We have had a lot of pulls on Cthulhu, and for our first 20 pulls, I'd say, on the PTR, I'm sure some of you are laughing right now, as you know what I'm going to say. The chain lightning, or the chain I-beam thing, is horrible. If you don't know how to run in the room, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I think we're going to see, in the Race the World first, we're going to see a lot of guilds screw this up. It's not hard to screw up, to be honest. The first 2 beams, according to research we've done, are 100% dedicated to be on the main tank. So you have some time. It's that 3rd beam that's going to be a problem. As long as whoever that's targeted on, hopefully Bigwigs and DBM will target that player, and they run away, hopefully to the wall or something that's farther away, you shouldn't have a problem. They should just take that 1 hit and they'll survive. And then the rest of phase 1 is basically making sure you don't stack too much if you're killing a tentacle or an eye stalk, because that chain lightning is still going on. It's very important that during that rotating I-beam, the one that's like the Super Saiyan I-beam that will one-shot anyone, it moves very slowly, and I'm going to link an image. I'm going to put an image on screen right now, and I'll link it in the description as well. You can download it. It's a very helpful image that you can use to kind of know where you're going to be standing during the I-beam. And they're color coordinated. So let's say group 3 is in the group 3 section. If you'll notice, the opposite end, I think it's group 7, is also yellow. That's where you're going to rotate to during the I-beam, because it's a 180-degree sweep. It's very important to realize he doesn't do his chain lightning when he's doing this Super Saiyan I-beam, okay? So you can get to that section very quickly as long as there's no stalks up, and you can reposition and get everyone ready for the next chain lightning phase after that. To me, phase 1 is the hardest part. After getting out phase 1, it's just making sure you tank the big claw tentacles, the big eye stalks. Those have to be CC'd immediately, interrupted, earth shocked, whatever you can do, pummeled, kicked, because they also do the chain lightning, okay? And that's where the chain lightning is going to be coming from in phase 2 and phase 3. Not from Cthulhu himself. So those things take priority. The big claw tentacles take second priority, and then all the other tentacles take priority. Now, this is the part where random players are going to be teleported into his stomach. I think killing those claws inside are going to go way faster than they did back in vanilla. Especially if there's warriors in there, they're going to just chunk these things down. As your healer, if you get put in there, you can stay in there for a little bit. Just don't stay in the goo. Move out of the goo. Make sure you heal whoever goes down there and heal yourself up. You can survive probably a couple teleports of different people going in there. Get those things down as fast as possible, because phase 3 is the part where Cthulhu takes significant amount of damage. Because phase 2, when he's not weakened, he takes almost no damage. Phase 1, he takes normal damage. And then phase 3, when he's damaged, when he turns red, he takes a lot of damage. And you could potentially, I think there's going to be high-end guilds that are going to one-phase Cthulhu. I think for most guilds, you're going to be looking for 2 to 3 phases of this. It's all about positioning, and this is where the single player has a huge impact on the raid. If you're in the wrong place, if there's too many people stacked up and the chain lightning goes out, chain I-beam, whatever you want to call it, you're going to have problems. Cthulhu is a lot of moving around, a lot of raid-wide coordination, and this is the first fight in Classic WoW where there's so much pressure and responsibility on a single player and the whole raid moving as a unit. And I know I said that. If you watch the BWL Thoughts and Predictions video, I said that as well. This is much more. It's almost like, I'd say, a 4 horsemen level of raid-wide coordination. And this is going to be the hardest boss in AQ40. I don't think anything even comes close. So this is going to be the tough one for you guys. So those are my thoughts on AQ40. I like to go over my predictions of what I think we're going to see as the raid comes out. And the first one is time commitment. So I think time commitment is going to be much higher compared to BWL. You're going to have multiple nights, whereas we do BWL and MC in one night. It's a joke. AQ40 is going to take at least the whole night, or 2 nights, maybe even 3 nights, depending on the raid, depending on how far you're in progression, how much gear you've had drop, these kind of things. I think a lot of the raids are going to fall off the table for most guilds. MC obviously is going to fall off ZG, for the most part, might fall off in place of AQ20 unless you need enchants, where you can run in and kill those bosses for the idols. I think ZG and MC are going to take a back seat for most guilds here because the time commitment is much higher with AQ40, and the commitment to get consumables is also going to be much higher. Now, I talked about the single player importance, but I want to stress that one more time. I think you're going to see a lot more, a closer magnifying glass on a lot of your raiders by your officer corps because of who screwed up here, who got the chain lightning to hit multiple players, who wasn't standing in the right place. That's going to be very important, whereas I think in BWL, for most players, your positioning really doesn't matter much unless it's a certain fight, like Firemoth. This is going to be a much bigger thing, and I think it's going to be, if you're on a loot council system, it's going to be a point of contention, like, you know, did this person stand in the right place? Did they pull the boss? Did they do this right? Did they do that right? And you're going to see this trend continue in the next round, is because there are going to be a lot more fights like that. So single player responsibility is much higher, and I just want to say that one more time. And my prediction here is you're going to see a lot more, a magnifying glass on a lot more players. The next is world buff uptime and usage. We rely on world buffs a lot right now, BWL and MC, at least my raid does, to get clear times down, to get these high parses. And as I said in the last video, parses don't mean shit during progression. They don't mean shit during progression here. They never mean shit during progression as far as I'm concerned. That should be your least worry. You should be getting the mechanics down and getting the bosses down. World buffs are going to be a lot less reliable because of the randomness, like I said before, of this raid. All you got to do is have the wrong roll on one of these Anubisath Defenders or Sentinels, whatever they're called, and you're going to have a bad time. You're going to lose your world buffs, and you're going to get really mad. You can't get mad. You got to power through it. I think for most raids, you're going to get to Cthulhu with no world buffs. You're going to get to a lot of bosses with no world buffs unless you start fresh the next day. You got to be okay with that, and I think that's a big thing here, is that if there is burnout coming out, I think it'll be come from that. Of course, there's going to be burnout from raids not getting through it, guilds not being able to do these fights, and that's perfectly okay. But I think there's going to be a lot of burnout because of world buffs. I'm not saying don't get them, I'm saying that don't rely on them as much as you did before. Rely on your ability to do the mechanics, rely on the ability of your guild and your leadership core to get through these things, because let's face it, guys, this is doable without world buffs. It is. It's been done without world buffs. You can do it too. Getting them is going to be important. Maintaining them is going to be important, but you should definitely think about it that way. And don't look at it as, you know, the end-all be-all, which I think we've all looked at them as in the last two phases. Consumables. Flasks are going to be really important for the first couple weeks of progression because flasks persist during death, and I think there's going to be a lot of people dying. So flasks are going to be very important here because that's going to be a continuity of increased damage or mana throughput or stamina that you're going to be able to have. And I think Flask of the Titans are going to be very important here, especially for fights like Cthulhu. Your melee DPS would probably think, well, I have no Flask, it benefits me, and that's obviously not true. Flask of the Titans will benefit you, and I think Flask of the Titans will be better for all classes in fights like Cthulhu, over Distilled Wisdom, over Supreme Power. And then we have new consumables, Brilliant Mana Oil, Brilliant Wizard Oil. Those are going to be really important to have. The Greater Firepower Elixir, now that mages are going fire. There's going to be a lot of consumables that are going to be used. Nature Protection Potions, Arcane Protection Potions, greater of those as well. I would definitely use graders if you can, if you don't have that, the ability or the gold. The smaller ones will do a little bit, and those we're definitely going to have. And I would have those stacked up. Major Mana Potions for healers and DPS, Demonic Runes, Dark Runes, all these things are going to be much more impactful during progression in AQ40 compared to any other raid tier. Consumables will be very important because you can keep popping them, and they are better than world buffs in that way, right? You can have a steady supply of those in your bags. Very important to have consumables. I think that's going to shine a lot during progression in AQ40. When will the first full clear happen? It'll happen day one. I think that the first kill will happen probably somewhere within 1 to 2 hours, somewhere in that window. But I will not be surprised, I'll say this again, I will not be surprised if either the whole raid or most of the raid does not have world buffs going into Cthulhu. I think that no amount of practice can prepare you for some points of randomness that we can't replicate on PTRs or on private servers. And I think that we're going to have people dying to stupid things. I think that you might have a guild wipe on Cthulhu before they kill them, before they get their world first. I think that might happen with a chain bad I-beam, who knows. The first world first kill will be, in my opinion, with a guild that is not 100% world buff. That could be due to the amount of time they're in there, longer than 2 hours, or longer than 1 hour, obviously. Your 1 hour buffs will go away, or or most likely to be due to people dying in random places. Maybe even a full raid-wide wipe before the first kill. That's my prediction. I may be totally wrong about that. We might see a guild go in there before the hour buffs are gone and kill Cthulhu. That may happen. I think the chances of that are way lower than they were on BWL. And you saw the bugs that were in the BWL world first. It was kind of crazy, and I think that it's not weird to think, or off base to think, that won't happen again, considering we didn't practice AQ40 on the official PTR. Very possible. The last thing I want to talk about is the world first kill, whatever that world first kill will be, and your first Cthulhu kill. I highly stress to not kill the optional bosses until you have Cthulhu down. And I think the first Cthulhu kill will not have the optional bosses down. They'll go afterwards and kill those bosses for the raid, for the gear that drops, but at the world first Cthulhu kill and your raid's first Cthulhu kill will be without the additional bosses. We'll actually see them killed last. So the last boss you may see killed in AQ could be the Bug Trio or Ouro or Viscidus. That's totally normal, and that's actually what happened in original WoW. One of my my raid leader was telling us that Cthulhu was killed and then Ouro was killed. That's what you're going to see here as well. So guys, I think I covered pretty much everything. Apologies for the long video, but there's a lot to talk about in this raid. I think you guys can do it. You just gotta be patient. You gotta lean on each other, respect each other, and do your homework, and know what consumables you need. Know what the mechanics are. Read the guide I posted below about the trash. Look at that image on Cthulhu. And I actually made a weak aura to put that image on my screen during Cthulhu so I know where I'm standing. I highly recommend doing that. If you guys want, I can link you a video that I did for my guild. It's not like high quality. It's literally telling my guild how to do it. If you guys want that in the comments, let me know. I'll link it in the description so you can see how to put that on as a weak aura. That's about it. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed, anything you'd like to talk about more. I'll try to maybe do a follow-up video. But, you know, stay strong, have patience, have faith in your guild, and you'll do well. All right, guys. Take it easy, keep on buying and grinding, and I'll see you in the next Defcamp Melderon TV video.